Welcome to the continued podcast adventures of Superhero Speak.
But I think many of the people that love this character and that love superheroes in general have used these stories as inspiration to say, you know what, I'm going to do something good in the world. I'm going to make a difference like my hero when I was a kid.
That is my fondest memory of it, because when you're doing comic books, you want them to affect people, right? You want people to care. You want to strike emotions, and I knew that Clone Saga was striking a lot of emotions.
Can you imagine Pulp Fiction starring Goofy and Mickey Mouse?
I can totally imagine that.
I'm sure somebody's written that one
quarter
too.
pounder with cheese and France, Mickey. What? Boy, ale with cheese, Mickey. Yeah, I can totally.
See?
I would watch the hell out of that movie.
Yes, I gladly sacrifice up my progeny to you, almighty Marvel beast.
But Neil Adams is somewhere going, it's my time.
How do you measure success? Hey everyone, and welcome to Superhero Speak. I'm your host Dave, and yeah, I'm alone tonight, kinda. I've got a special episode for you guys this week. We haven't done this in a while. We have a good sit-down interview with us. We have two writers who are currently working on Survival Street, a book from Dark Horse Comics coming. Okay, let me ask that real quick before I say your names. Is it out or is it...
Issue 1 is August 3rd, so it depends on when the Magic Time Portal drops this episode into their ear holes.
It'll be out this week, but so it's in previews then currently.
Yes, and we've got a 0 issue you can read for free digitally.
Okay, so speaking, we have James Asmus.
Yes, hello.
And of course, his writing partner, Jim Festante.
Festante. It was very close, Dave. It was very close.
I am terrible with names. My late wife was Italian, and she's probably rolling in her grave because I was always bad with Italian names. So
I mean, there's a lot of vowels. There's a lot of vowels and a lot of accents.
You landed the rhyme though, so you.
Yeah.
Yes. So I guess I'll start off with a very simple question. Neither one of you can answer this. What is the elevator pitch for Survival Street?
Sure. So the book is set in a near future America where corporations get everything they want. Basically, after, you know how right now they have some of the rights of people as has been ruled. This near future Supreme Court decides they get all the rules of people, including running for government. So corporations basically take over the Senate. They privatize everything. There are no worker protections. They strip mine every public good in the country, and now you have to pay for it. And every town becomes a company town where you're basically indebted to whatever business controls it.
I'm sorry, you said this is a future story?
I know, it takes place in 3 days. And so, of course, one of the things that gets shut down is public broadcasting. So the very real fuzzy creatures and performers who performed on children's entertainment are out of a job. And some of them decide to go out and form an A-team like band of mercenaries to travel this like corporate badlands to keep defending and educating kids in a paramilitary fashion. And so it's basically to say, if companies got everything they were lobbying for and there was nothing left to protect us, the fuzzy entertainers from our childhood would be the last line of defense. And so that's the world we're playing with.
Sounds accurate.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
unfortunately, it seems like the most unrealistic part of this book is the puppets.
Yeah. Yeah, when we started working on this like over a year ago, kind of put together the storylines and the concept and the pitch and everything, a lot of our particulars in the story beats were more outrageous, outlandish, and satirical, and reality has quickly closed the gap. So in some of our in some of our final scripting, we really had to turn up the dial. So we really encourage people to buy the issues as they're coming out and not wait for the trade, because by the time you get to the trade, it might just be a documentary.
So what goes, like, I mean, I'm going to guess that it came from just looking at the real world around you, but like, where did the idea come from, really?
Well, Jim and I we're kind of always working on something together, and we're kind of always just talking about other concepts and, you know, venting about life and stuff that's on our mind. And I don't even remember the moment that we landed on this, but I do know that, you know, we were talking about creating a new project where it just was set in this kind of world where we could keep talking about whatever issue of the week is bubbling up and starting to drive us crazy or scare us, you know what I mean? Or like we have young children that's starting to make us really genuinely concerned about like, if this is the argument or this is the thing happening now, step 2, 3, 4 down the road is terrifying. And so we wanted a world that just already, like, the rules set up all of that is at its worst, so we can tell whichever story is most on our minds. And somewhere in there, kind of, I think it was just like, well, of course public broadcasting is shut down, so all of those very real performers are, you know, they need something else to do. And I think that kind of, as soon as that idea was there, the contrast between everything those shows told us as kids of like sharing, compassion for others, like caring for the people who are different from you or who need something. It's so sincere, it's so earnest, it's so pure, and it's so colorful. And we realized in every way it was the opposite to the world we were setting up and building, that it's the perfect contrast where character is the story, is the theme, and you have so much more of an immediate emotional buy-in to these things that remind you of kind of pure childhood idealism, right? And seeing them a little faded and messed up and corrupted into this world, but still fighting to hold on to their values and their beliefs. And that felt really relatable to us and powerful. So I think whatever that started as a joke, we really quickly realized like, no, that's actually like, that's the right hero for that world and that story. And then I think we couldn't shake it. And it jumped to the top of what we wanted to work on out of all of the ideas.
So, okay, I have to ask this then, because a lot of those puppets that we grew up loving are owned by the biggest corporation in the world currently. And was there any pushback from the publisher to say like, hey, you know, should we do this? Or did you get permission from Disney to use likenesses?
No, I mean, it's satire, it's parody, it's, you know, within our right to kind of spoof this stuff. We never call out, you know, we're not doing a one-to-one comparison of actual characters. It's more about kind of the flavor of these characters that we grew up watching and kind of how they approach their way of teaching and caring for children. And so another thing is that James and I come from an improv comedy background. And so we learned very early on in our careers the importance of specificity and, you know, taking a character and kind of spinning out like based on, you know, maybe one or two things that we know about them and how they are in the world and how that informs the rest of them. So we kind of like came at it of like, well, how do we form this group? You know, we need someone that's like a leader, someone who's kind of the brains and overseeing things. We need someone that's like the optimist, someone that's the pessimist, the wild card. You know, you come from, we're also coming from a place of looking at these kind of episode of the week shows like A-Team and
like Knight Rider and all of these, like traveling hero kind of. And so the book is structured that way too, where every issue kind of is a standalone adventure and it starts to have cumulative consequences. But we really wanted to capture that kind of like episode of the week and then you move on to another town kind of thing, which also let us touch on more and more issues and ideas and anxieties, as well as like comedic treasure chests. You know what I mean? We just got to keep opening new ones. But yeah, like Jim was saying, you know, it was, we made a point. We weren't interested in just saying, haha, wouldn't it be funny if this character had a gun? We're always we're always more kind of emotionally invested. I think we like big, crazy, silly, bad behavior ideas, but then we really, having started as like actors and performers, it's in our nature to just dig into the psychology and really try to relate and understand to our comedic characters. So we dig a little deeper, I think, than people might be expecting. And so it also means, like he was saying, that we flesh them out to be, you know, we start with you can recognize kind of a type, but we get into adding much more specifics than you would have ever seen from some of an analogous character. And It gets much more adult and much more sincere. And I almost think of it like there's the actors we think of as always playing this type of character, but who is that person off screen? And what are their demons? What's the depth to them? Even if they do have some of that same zhuzh, some of that same vibe of their characters.
You guys are improv comics. How did the idea of writing a comic come about? Is that something that you've always wanted to do? And I will say that this is probably the story that you're describing. A comic is probably the best vehicle for delivering it. It's not something you could easily get away, even on television or whatever. Like, you can do it so much in a comic and get away with it in a fantasy story like this. But I'm just curious, like how that came about, landing this as a comic.
Well, so I think we kind of had two different paths. We both always loved comics, and especially just kind of like literature, fantasy, sci-fi storytelling. And, you couldn't get me to read a book as a kid, but I would read any comic you handed me.
Right.
And then, years ago in like 2008, Marvel hired me off of a musical comedy I had written that was running in New York. And once I had my foot in the door in comics, I was like, you guys are never getting rid of me. And so it's just been me, because I love it. I love the medium too much. So I've been, working everywhere I can. And Jim and I together did the first creator-owned I had done in 2012 for Image, which was End Times of Bram and Ben.
Oh, okay. And
that was, he and I started doing comedy together. We met in Los Angeles and Las Vegas doing some comedy with some mutual friends. And we had that idea, and originally we're maybe thinking about doing it as a web series or something for ourselves. But really quickly, the scope of what we wanted to do in that story and like the conflict between heaven and hell, it just like what was funny and possible to us was just well beyond anything we could do. And I was like, well, I've been in comics for a few years. We could try this. And I'd love to hear, for as much as we work together, I don't always hear Jim's perspective about having switched over to this medium, but we've done now four or so projects together in it.
Yeah, no, I come from a different background than James. And it's funny because I came to comics pretty late in life. Like my first books were right after college is when I kind of got introduced into the medium. Like I'd read a couple things, when I was a kid, nothing long-term or seriously, other than like, I of course watched like the X-Men 90s cartoon. And so I knew all of the kind of the touch points, but it wasn't really until after college that I got very much into comic books and graphic novels. And so coming to it from like, I write a lot of like regular TV scripts and digital and shorts and stuff like that. So it was kind of a learning curve for me when we started doing End Times. And, James and I really like, that was when we were both living in the same city. And so we'd meet up and like, get to like hash everything out over like several hours a day. And it was just a super fun collaboration. And I miss it terribly. It's not the same when we talk over the phone, but it was, I had it in my mind of like wanting to tell, certain things, or like, James is very good about, he understands the medium in a way of like the efficiency of it and how to tell a coherent story when you're limited to a certain amount of pages and certain amount of panels. You can't really fill a panel with text as much as sometimes we try. So
well, I still push the envelope on my own stuff too, much to my lovers' dismay. But no, it is true. Like he and I also got hired to write some animation stuff for development together, and it's amazing. You can throw in 6 more lines of dialogue and do like a tag on joke and a tag on joke and a tag on joke and have it take 10 seconds.
Right.
But if you're doing that in a comic page and you want a new visual and you can't fit that without blowing up your page count, or everything gets squeezed so much that, you're going to lose, it won't play effective. And so there are so many jokes Jim has come up with that like hurt me to lose in projects we've done. And in most of our projects, End Times, we did field tripping for Comixology Originals. And then for this, we have dipped into our own pocket to pay for to add extra pages into almost every issue we've ever done, because there was something where we were like, that's too good. We want to have that in the book. And so we will make less on the book personally, or we will pay $300 of our own money right now to give people these 2 extra pages that are going to have an emotional impact, or like, because this is too funny, we have to give this to people, like something.
Yeah. And I mean, also just with that too, like, again, coming to it a little bit later and maybe not having, I don't want to say like the reverence for the medium maybe that you do, James, but like, I think I might be like being a couple steps out of it, have a little bit more of a critical eye. And, you know, I read a ton of books and I kind of feel like sometimes there's an easy trap, again, because you are kind of constrained in this medium in a way that, for me at least, no other writing medium is similar. You don't always have the chance to do as much character development. And sometimes a lot of books that I read get a little bit too steeped in plot, and you know, plot is kind of, to me, the death of, you know, storytelling. Plot is important. We need plot. Obviously, it's got to drive a story, but also for me, for us, you know, the things that we find the most interesting is that character development, is that honest relationship between characters. So when you're trying to script a lot of plot and big moments and entertaining things, like sometimes I think it slips through the cracks to do all of that character development, but that's, I don't know, for me at least, like where the really interesting stuff happens. So it's great that we're able to, in our creator books, add pages. And honestly, also like coming from a different background than you know, being a comics writer for as long as James has, what I love too is the collaboration of the artist. You know, that was not something that I was expecting when we started doing these books. And when we did End Times and our artist Rembrew would come back with sketches and inks and doing his own jokes, like coming up with like really funny stuff that we did not ask for in the script, but he interpreted in a way that was his own take on it. And that kind of collaboration, not only with another writer, but then a visual artist, is so cool. And again, something that I just love about making comics, because it is, you get this other perspective, you get another way of telling stories beyond words in this visual way that can be so surprising and fun. And, you know, our artist for Survival Street is, you know, he's incredible. He is so good at just tone and comedy and timing and storytelling. It's really a gift as a writer to find another collaborator like that.
Yeah, it's insane. So his name is Abylay Kusanov, and he had not done anything that had come out in the United States. He'd done a couple small projects. He lives in Kazakhstan. He did a small book. Well, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say small. It might have a huge footprint, but you know, culturally, it didn't get imported here. Yeah. So that's what I should say. Is so I don't know the footprint. It's called Brothers, and I believe that was released in Russia. Maybe that's not the cool thing right now, but it was a few years ago. So
hate the government, not the people.
Exactly. Yeah, it's not their fault.
But yeah, and he had done some projects that came out in Kazakhstan, but I just thought his storytelling was really good. His designs were really good. And, you know, we were kind of interested in finding something to do together. And Jim and I had this idea, and we just sort of, in the pandemic, just kind of wrote a short version, like a 12-page thing, which is this, what we're calling a 0 issue that we put out for free. And it was really just kind of our own test of like trying out the concept, you know what I mean? Like wanting to really just write something for it, write a mini mission. And nail down the vibe and the tone. And we were really happy with it. And then we kind of sent it over to him. And Abylay's first character designs were so perfect. He understood everything that we had communicated, but even like he started intuiting like what was in our heads that we hadn't even put down. Like he just got on the same page. And so I immediately was like, okay, we have to try and make this book because he's the right person for it. And that's, you can have the right idea, but if you don't have the right team, it's right. Oh yeah. You're running a 3-legged race instead of just sprinting. But he like Jim was saying, he was another dream collaborator. And so and it's only continued to be that way. He keeps nailing every assignment in a beautiful, beautiful way. So we were so thrilled to do the book with him.
Cool. And that's another good point too. I mean, being from Kazakhstan, I'm sure he sees some American news, but to like truly get the vibe for the corruption in this country.
Well, that's one place where they can vibe with us.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
That's true. I have lots of friends who are from that area of the world, and they all say the same thing.
Yeah. So it's, I wish it were a uniquely American problem. I think we have a type of weird performative nature to some of our issues here. That's part media and part just the land of selling everything.
Right. Yes.
Where I think ours gets a little more just kind of commodified and like bad ideas are turned into new Coke and like sold to you in these weird performative fashions. And so I think that makes, again, characters who are entertainers like a perfect foil to so many of the types of things we're playing with. But yeah, they get enough of it there where most of the time he's known everything we're referencing and talking about. And if not, I'll send him links to ruin his day and be like, yeah, this is who's been trying to push the global order and conversation for the last 20 years while we've been doing all this stuff that I'm sending you links for.
I love the analogy of New Coke. That's one of my favorite disaster stories ever in the fact that and it's funny, I actually just learned some details about it too. I didn't realize that's when they introduced corn syrup and stopped using regular sugar. That was the whole point of the new formula for Coke.
Interesting.
People hated the taste, so then they came back out with classic Coke until they found additives that made it taste a little bit more, and then slowly reintroduced it, and then boom, that now we have corn syrup and Coke.
God bless America.
Well,
exactly.
That New Coke to me makes me think about all the people who say like government should be run like a business, and I'm like, do you know that 80% of businesses go out of business? Like, do you know? Maybe you want government to go out of business, but like most restaurants that last 3 years. Like
that is something that they've been, arguing the whole like small enough to drown in a bathtub. That's nothing new. That's 40 something years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so so in that leaden depression of silence, I'll also add that our colorist Ellie Wright and our letterer Taylor Esposito were both people I had wanted to work with for a little while, that I'd just been seeing post really good work, and kind of people that I had worked with before in various ways were not available here, and I was like, okay, these are two people I'm really keen to work with. And they've both just been like total delights and total pros, and they've just delivered everything we asked for and more. And it's wonderful to have like comics. Comics doesn't pay enough to deal with horrible people, and it's also filled with wonderful people. And so every time you get to do a project, and you're like, oh my God, I love communicating with and working with every person on this team, and then they're turning in exactly, they're turning in what we need and more.
And on the dark horse side as well. The team there has just been nothing but supportive, and so it's just like, this book like has just been like, again, like my favorite thing that James and I have ever done together, and also just in a production way, the easiest, just from, again, all of the people that we've been collaborating with, it's been the easiest book to make, if not the most rage inducing.
Well, that's just it. The ease of making it is only, I think, because everyone had the same anxiety to burn, and we're all happy to have an outlet for it, something to do something cathartic. But yeah, if we're also like a cursed production and plagued with problems, I can only imagine the pit of rot that would be forming in my stomach by now. But instead, I'm so happy, and I can't wait for people to read it.
So obviously the first issue comes out in a couple weeks, but do you get, and you said the book's going to be episodic, but do you have a plan? Like, do you want to do 4 issues, 10 issues, or do you just want to keep going as long as you can?
So the current contract we have with Dark Horse it's a 4-issue miniseries. Mm-hmm. My hope is that enough people go out, pick it up and dig it, that we go do volume 2 or season 2. You know what I mean? And I know I've also floated the idea that I would love to do kind of an oversized special, almost structured more like a kids show, so that you have like an educational segment for a couple of pages in one art style, and, you know, something else that's, you know, a different type of story in a different art style, and kind of play with it for something like that. Just because I feel like this world opens up a lot we could do. But I mean, no joke, Jim and I have like notes for 10 other stories we already want to do, and then we kind of like put a pin in it. I know we could just keep doing more. I'm constantly opening notes files for this concept, and I'm like, we could do this, or like, here's something to tackle. We've come up with way more puppet characters than are in this that we would love to see, and not all of them would be, you know, sort of on the team, but just coming up with different sort of homages to Muppets, Puppets, Fraggles, whatever have you, you know.
And their human counterparts.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the characters that helps the team, that is part of the team, is kind of like their human handler, who can kind of, you know, get into places that they can't, because he is a human being, and less conspicuous, you know, again, based on like the Mr. Gordon type from, you know, those types of characters of like the people that hung out in the neighborhood. Ours just happens to be on the way out, grabbed all of his costumes, and is now a master of disguise. I did that in quotes because, you know, he'll show up as like an old timey milkman, or, you know, that it's that kind of vibe, kind of.
Yeah, if he's gonna go where rich people are, he's wearing a top hat and a monocle and all this stuff while they're Florida millionaires in board shorts. You know what I mean?
Oh my God, that's so perfect.
So it's that's the kind of thing we have. Sort of there's fun comedic kind of quirks to every character in this. So even though we're digging into real stuff, it's also blown up to absurd, you know, satire levels, and then we're playing with characters who are themselves kind of wild. So
I appreciate stories like that. I think that is something you have to do, is when you're dealing with heavy topics that are on a lot of people's minds nowadays too, is that you have to balance it out with comedy so that you can swallow it and think about it. You know, it's funny. I don't know if you guys have seen Love and Thunder yet.
Not yet.
Okay. Well,
we have to get babysitters before we can go.
My youngest is 20, so he just went with me. But he came out of the movie and said it brilliantly. Like, it's along the I'll say this, it's along the lines of Ragnarok with the comedy aspects of it. And he's like, yeah, but they were dealing with such heavy topics, you had to balance it with the comedy. And there's topics of loss and love and throughout the whole movie, and it's like it was really well done in that aspect when you think about it. So yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, you know, there's so many beautiful, well-made drama films that touch on real weighty things about the human experience, and those are forever in my Netflix list, and I never choose to watch them. Right?
Yes.
It's like, and I need a little bit of candy coating to make my medicine go down. And but I mean, one of my favorite films of all time, one of the most formative things for me, was Harold and Maude, which is all about, like, you know, just depression and ways to, how can you start to believe life is worth living if you don't currently feel like it is. And that is bleak, and it's one of the funniest movies, and it has a running gag of over the top fake suicides that he does to try to freak out his mother. And it's just it makes me laugh and cry at the same time, and to me that is sublime. Like, that's the best human experience, when you're having those conversations with your friends and you get to that point and you're laughing and crying. If you're enjoying entertainment that is like striking both chords at once, like that's what I love. And a lot of times I also just write funny, stupid things. Like, that's fine too. We need that as well. But but with this book, we definitely are trying to play it on a couple levels at once. And the first few reviews we've got have all really said that they're impressed, like they're getting it. It's coming across that way. It's working on those levels. And that is just the biggest relief to me, because I do think it was a little more ambitious for us, because we do still want it to be entertaining. I mean, that's the trick about having spent years performing live comedy is, oh boy, you get a deep instinct to not let people down, because like a silent crowd at a comedy show, you feel them resent you. You feel them thinking about what else they could have spent their money on. And it starts to be an inescapable, it's like a black hole for you as a performer, because it immediately brings you into a bad place. So we developed instincts that I think know how to balance stuff and find some laughs for most people. Humor is subjective. If you read it and you don't think it's funny, it's not your humor.
Right.
Thank you for the $4.20 of your time. And but I promise you, no one can say we didn't sweat over every line and every panel and every page to try to make it say what we meant, but also have people walk away saying, I'm glad I read that. Right. I enjoyed that, which is different from, well, that was thoughtful. You know what I mean? Or something like that.
Right.
No, it's as a, from years of comedy, you want to say, you want the audience to be like, oh, thank you. Right. And that's still our instinct, even when we're getting into darker stuff.
So I can't remember which one of you said this, but it was a great point where you're more interested in character than plot. And there's a lot of great movies, especially throughout history. Like, the plot is really simple. I mean, Star Wars, the plot is really simple to that, but the characters are great. Indiana Jones is another great example. Oh, yeah. It's actually, I love the point that if Indiana Jones was not in the movie, the same thing still happens. But, right. So I'm just curious. I'm asking each of you, who is one of your all-time favorite characters in fiction?
Ooh, I mean, right now, like, I mean, God, I could hand you a list of names, but I think for me right now, Saul Goodman. You know what I mean? Like Jimmy McGill, like talk about like that for me is it's the height of my God, what I hope that we're accomplishing in that you are looking at so many different angles of a person and their motivations and why they do certain things. And it's not just like he is a bad person. Anytime that he does something stupid, bad, misguided, it's explained. It comes from a real place. It doesn't excuse it. It never excuses the behavior, but at least you're sympathetic and understand why it's happening and where it's coming from, because no one as a human being acts in a void. We're not just we're always informed by so many things. And again, that doesn't mean to excuse behavior, but you have to understand where someone is coming from. And also that's how you connect to other people, because you yourself as a human being are complicated and full of contradictions and can be lovely and also horrible. I mean, how many nights you're trying to fall asleep and then like there's that thing that like you did 10 years ago and said to someone that they probably forgot about, but you're going to be spinning out about it for the next half hour while you're trying to fall asleep, and so like it's that. And
by the way, if you're listening and you don't have that happen to you, you're a sociopath and you should go talk to a therapist.
Yeah. So I mean, just off the top of my head, I would just say like right now with Better Call Saul, it's like, that's peak TV for me.
I think Jim's description of how character could be great is so good that I'll make my answers shorter, but I'll also name 3 different things. Okay. One that I just want to plug, because I feel like I didn't watch this forever because the ads made me think it was a totally different kind of show. Raylan Givens in Justified, which was an FX show on for a while. It's kind of a police procedural. It starts to have a little more ongoing story, but it starts as a procedural. Character is what makes that show a show I would watch. Right. And then it's become a show I've watched the entire thing 4 times. Because Elmore Leonard's writing that they model it off of is so character driven and rich and specific that no showdown is just a showdown. It's psychology, it's emotional, it's like when Jim says, plot is the death of storytelling, plot is character. When plot is all the plot is happening because of character driven choices. and it's stemming from that. And that show is so filled with it that I was totally hooked. And he was a great, complicated character. But then in comics, the two that have always been my magnet characters, I can't kick if they're starring in something, I gotta get it, are for very similar reasons, which is Mike Allred's Madman. And then Nightcrawler from the X-Men. It's very specifically the kind of like Claremontian Excalibur vibe of him.
Right.
And both of those are people who are constantly having existential inner monologues, like trying to figure out sort of the meaning of life or religion and human decency and all, like big questions. They're constantly thinking about those while also being characters who outwardly are just committed to having fun and bopping around and making everyone else have a good time and kind of swashbuckling joie de vivre. And to me, those are the two magnetic impulses like constantly pulling on my brain.
That's funny because that's actually how I would describe you, James. No, I'm serious. Like you're like what I miss about having you around and seeing you more than now, and or just like talking to you on a phone is like that's what I love about you is that you are a very deep, thoughtful person, but you also like, you know how to make people feel welcome and good, and you have a good time. I mean, you know, test kitchen karaoke is still one of my favorite nights. Like, it's just like, yeah. So it's interesting for me to hear you say that because that is kind of how I think you are.
Well, that's great. If I'm living like my heroes, I'm doing something right.
If only you had their powers.
Oh yeah. Hey, I do leave stinky clouds of sulfur when I leave a room plenty of times.
That is true. That I can also.
Nightcrawler and I have some overlap.
I would be remiss if I did not ask. You had written a Rick and Morty story.
Yes. Yeah, we wrote a Meeseeks special together.
Yes, I have to ask. A, were you given carte blanche to do whatever you want, and like, what was that experience like? Because I love Rick and Morty. It's one of my favorite shows.
Oh, us too.
Yeah. No, what's funny is like we pitched like 4 or 5 different ideas.
Okay.
And the Meeseeks like one, you know, I loved the idea, but it's also like a terrifying idea. And so when they're like, yeah, let's make that one, we're just like,
so you know, they were looking for pitches for presents, and Jim and I mostly like working on our own stuff, but we were like, you know, if that's a license we can get onto, that's the right fit. And the pitch for Meeseeks, they were like, we've wanted someone to do it, but we don't know what a Meeseeks special is beyond what the episode is. And we really quickly settled on like, well, Meeseeks doesn't believe there's meaning to life. They just think existence is pain. They want to disappear. So if someone accidentally or purposely asked Meeseeks to convince them life has meaning, it would be fundamentally antithetical to their experience. And and then also to us, the challenge of, okay, in 40 pages, can you do a survey of all the things that some people think gives life meaning and filter all of that through a Rick and Morty lens? And how convinced can you be or not be by these various things? It was truly one of the most difficult challenges we could have possibly given ourselves. So of course they picked it. Yeah. I am genuinely proud of how it turned out. I don't know that we will I don't know that we'll transform anyone's life or mind when they read it. But I think for a 40-page comic, like I think we went way more ambitious and sincere, and it's jam-packed, and I think it's really interesting and rewarding, and I'm really proud of it. And it's one of those things that every, I don't know, 5 months since we wrote it, some website writes an article about it, or like someone writes some giant post on Reddit about it or something like that. And just every once in a while, I'll get these Google alerts where someone's just like, this issue is this is everything I want from the show, and it's in like one random issue and blah blah. It's like, all right, then we did what we set out to do. So
it sounds like such a perfect story too, because I mean that's the whole thing about arguing about the meaninglessness of life from Rick's point of view for the whole show. Like, yes, that's perfect.
Yeah. So it was, that was another one where, I mean, for work for hire, we really made sure we sweat every single page and choice and edit and space. Like, yeah, we didn't just coast on that check. We worked for it way more.
Yeah, that was easily the hardest thing I've ever had to write.
Yeah. But I think I found it really rewarding. So much that once we did it, I was like, can I buy extra copy? Like, I know you're sending me a bunch of comps, but I want to have this like forever to be able to
on the wall. That's art from one of the splash pages.
Oh, cool.
And so I was like, I want to have this at my table forever doing Comic-Cons, because if anyone likes half the stuff I've written, I want to be like, well, here, read this.
That was going to be one of my next questions. You guys, this is, I don't know how to say this. It's like 1 minute, it feels like the pandemic's over. The next minute, not quite sure yet. But
I currently have COVID. So,
well, there you go.
I'm 3 weeks into it because I have a bunch of immune problems. So it's really dragging on for me.
Stinks.
I'm much better now than I was before. But so you were asking about conventions, yeah?
Yeah. So I mean, they're back. I mean, San Diego is coming up. New York is going to be back this year.
Yeah.
So do you guys have plans to attend any of them?
Yeah, we were going to do Emerald City.
Okay.
Jim has not yet contracted COVID. He has been, masking and working from home and being careful. And we had
even people that have been careful and masking from home have gotten it. So I have no idea how I've escaped this thing, but like I'm in no hurry to get it.
Yeah. So because Emerald City just changed their health guidelines, there's a strong chance we don't do it. I think unless they change it back soon. I know Jim won't do it, and I'm not sure if I am or not, especially because supposedly coming off of having COVID, I'll be probably immune. So I can say this. I am doing C2E2.
Okay.
We are flying to Chicago to see my wife's family, who we haven't seen in 2.5 years. And that just is happening. So I just am doing C2E2 to help write that flight off on my taxes. But also, that's right the weekend after the book comes out. So if you're in Chicago, come see me. I'll be so excited. And I'm here in Portland for Rose City, so I wouldn't have to fly. And Rose City last year was a really good show about giving everyone space, and people were really good about masking. So I feel pretty confident I'll be doing Rose City as well. Emerald City, maybe check when we're a little closer.
Okay.
And New York Comic Con, honestly, I was originally thinking about having us go, but flight costs might kill us. We're both West Coast. So
right. Yeah. I'm East Coast, so I do New York every year. So
I love New York. I love Baltimore Comic Con, honestly. That's a real comics focused show with a ton of great guests. But yeah, if flights are still really expensive, I probably won't shake out those.
Yeah, well, if the price of fuel doesn't go down.
Right.
I don't think the price of flights are going to go down.
Oh, and apparently I'm going to do a one-day convention in Las Vegas in November put on by the library. So if anyone listening is out in Las Vegas, find me at that thing.
And also, maybe, we can do LA. You can come out to LA and we'll do that one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's in October.
Okay. Well, so who knows? Maybe we'll do a lot. And if you're listening and you run a convention, let's talk.
We also,
if you want to bring us up,
we're also we contracted a local LA artist to make puppets for us.
Yes.
So kind of excited to bring those to conventions and have fun with those. But safety first, kids. Safety first.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because last year when I went to New York, obviously the city was requiring to show proof of vaccination, and everyone got a little wristband that showed you showed your vaccination card. I was just there a few weeks ago to see The Music Man with Hugh Jackman on Broadway. And the only place that required anything is if you go to Broadway to see a show, you have to wear a mask. Other than that, everything's back to the way it was. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, Emerald City had a show just a few months ago, and I did that one, and they still had vaccine requirements and mask requirements, and it went great. Like it was a huge long line out front that moved so fast. I was through it in 6 minutes. And, when it was a block long, they had it running really efficiently. And I did the show and I didn't get sick. Everyone was masked. It was good. So I was kind of bummed that after the deadline for buying your tables and everything, then they announced that they were dropping that. So we'll see. I
was just shocked in of all cities, New York, they dropped it. So it was just,
Yeah.
That was shocking, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's I understand that plenty of people have had it and been fine, but again, as someone who's lost 3 weeks of work out of this, like, even if that's all that happens to you, I don't wish that on you.
Right.
I don't know if you have 3 weeks of sick pay accrued. I know I don't as a freelancer. So
exactly.
I had massive vertigo for 2 weeks and I couldn't turn my head without starting to throw up. I couldn't write. So stuff like that was a little bit of a hand grenade into my plans. So I don't wish that on me. You know what I mean?
Right. I agree. All right. So that actually is a good way to segue to a question that we always ask. We sign off the podcast by saying, don't let your cape get caught in the door, which originally was a joke, and it was born out of The Incredibles, Edna. Yeah. But it's actually kind of come to being like, don't let your foibles or your shortcomings block you from getting to your goals. So what is an obstacle in your life that you've overcome to get to where you are?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. I would say I'm very Midwestern. I was raised in Ohio. It took me a long time to learn to advocate for myself. It took me way too long to confidently say I should be considered for something, or that, I'm worth more than I'm being paid. Or it really took until I had children and I was looking at the fact that I was now actually responsible for making sure someone else got fed. Yeah. Like, as a starving artist, I was okay kind of having the bottom fall out of me a couple times, but I couldn't do that anymore then. So one of the things I often find, there's two people in creative pursuits, ones who have way too much confidence in their own ability and ones who do not have enough confidence, and they're comparing themselves against the perfect, and they're thinking I have to beat Neil Gaiman out for this writing job, or I have to beat Jim Lee out for this penciling job. And the answer is you don't. You have to beat out the worst person currently working in the field. Right. Now, they might have connections and friends and whatever that you don't know, but if you're better than those, don't feel bad about pursuing what you want. At the same time, keep self-criticism open and look. You don't have to beat yourself up, but look for the ways you can get better. And it might be in your skills, or it might be in the way you treat and talk to people. Yeah, but those are the things. Be open to an honest check for yourself of how can I do better without beating yourself up? Because like Jim was saying, I'll spend 2 hours in the middle of the night thinking about something dumb I said, but it helps to shift that thinking into like, okay, well, how do I do better? And that's the focus, rather than I don't have a time machine to change what I said or whatever.
I think a big one for me is like how you define success. And I think and it's a little bit of a cheat, because I think part of it also just comes from getting older and having your values shift. But yeah, coming from this background of just like as a performer, and anyone who starts out as a kid or whatever as a performer, it's just like your goal is always like attention, right? That's what you want. You want attention. You want ultimately to be a famous person. And also work, I coming out of UCB in New York, when it was like Amy Poehler was my teacher, because it was just like they just moved out and no one had gotten work from this stuff yet. And then all of a sudden, about a year or so into the New York scene, people were getting work and, booking TV shows, and, a lot of them went on to have these huge writing careers or acting careers. And I have friends who are wildly famous and successful. And so you kind of it's very hard to not compare yourself to that and be like, oh, why didn't I have that? And then you start to realize okay, but there's still things about that are difficult. You can be the lead of a show, and the day that the show ends, you're unemployed just like everyone else. And there's no guarantee of future work. So it's not as easy as everyone thinks it is. And so it's like recalibrating yourself to be like, okay, well, what is success? What makes me happy? What is the work that I'm doing and the life that I'm able to live from that, and the relationships that I have and my friends and my family, you just kind of recalibrate all of that and start to appreciate the things that you do have. And like I said, I do think there is a bit of a cheat is, you know, you get older and those things kind of just like, you know, hopefully start to work themselves out for you. But definitely, that of just like, and I think about that with my own kid of like, how do I get him to understand that of just like your life, your success isn't about any achievement you might have, but it's in your relationships. There's so many things that you can look to that you can say like, this is why I feel like my life is successful and why I'm happy, but it can be very clouded. And I think especially in our society of, you know, attention and money, that kind of, you know, that gets you away from the things that are truly important.
Yeah. Creative fields and attention economy can really turn you inward in bad ways. Mm-hmm. And making sure you have a solid definition of success for yourself that is not purely based on, you can't control your marketing. You can't control whether your book ever showed up in front of the person, like the kind of person who would love your book might just never have had your book put in front of them. And maybe it kept popping up in front of the people who just aren't your audience. And you're getting a bad luck of the draw. I don't know. It doesn't mean your book's bad. Doesn't mean your album was bad or anything like that.
Yeah.
So you got to find what success is that isn't these metrics so far outside of your control. Sorry, I'm coattailing on your thing, but I will.
But those are important points.
There's so many people I talk to at conventions who they're like, I want to work in comics, and because I have to write 100 issues of the Fantastic Four, or I have to write, I have this story for Batman that I need to tell, and it's a 20-page or it's a 20-issue, you know, epic. And the thing I always have to say is like, you can't make that your goal because there's one person who decides who gets to write those books. And if that person just happens to not like your sensibility, it's never going to happen. And it doesn't mean you don't have value as a writer, as an artist, as whatever, you know, colorist, letterer, whatever the thing is, and you want to work on that thing. It's so irrelevant to your worth that I beg people to have some other metric for how they'll consider success or goals. And I'm like, you know what I think? I think your goal should be that you sell someone a comic you created at a Comic-Con, and the next year they come back and they look for you to say, I loved that thing you wrote. What else do you have?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's a better goal. You connected with someone. What you said found someone and resonated. And I swear to God, you have more control over working toward that goal than you have over working toward getting to tell your Spider-Man Punisher story. Like, you just don't. You don't have that control. And even when I was working at Marvel and writing like 2 titles at a time or whatever, I didn't have control over saying, can I reboot Excalibur? No. We want to have you do all this other stuff though. Okay. But like, you don't have that control even when you're in the room. So if that's how you define success and happiness for yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure. I'm sure there's analogous situations in other jobs. So just pretend I'm talking about your job too. But
it's funny, not to get deep and nerdy, but you've ever heard of the concept of locust of identity? When there's people who have an internal and external, people who have external locus of identity, they only value themselves as other people see them, right? So they're the fame seekers. They're the people that want to be actors, comedians, no offense, writers.
I mean, we are offended to have been actors and comedians. Like, we're on our own. We are offended by ourselves.
And it's when but exactly what you guys are describing, it's when you can bring that internal and realize, well, wait, what actually makes me happy? What can I do to contribute and actually be happy? Like, not worrying about what everyone else is thinking. Maybe it just never got to the right audience, whatever you're working on. I mean, me, myself, I chased it for years. I was a musician in a lot of different bands and whatnot. And it never panned out. But like, then I got married and had a family, and that was a whole different ball game, you know? So yeah, exactly.
And you still got to be a musician and make music and have fun.
Exactly. Right. And that's how I look back on it. Like, it's the experience was more important than actually becoming famous.
Yes.
So you guys have stepped all over my final question, which is usually how do you measure success? But I think
well, technically, we just told you how not to.
Well, that is true.
That's fair. Yeah.
No, yeah, I set different goals of success on different projects, and some are clarity of what we're trying to communicate. Some are, did we get people to lower their guard and just find it funny and think about what we're saying? With other things, it's, I'm just looking to entertain. Every project has its own goal, but I do think it's important to start with that. Like, especially in collaborations. When Jim and I first started writing together, and I've done a lot of co-writing with different people, I usually start by saying, let's define what success is. Because if our goal is to make this the most populist, selling the most number of things to the most number of people, that's going to change what choices we make in the creative process. Right. Versus, are we trying to make something so perfectly us? Or are we trying to make something we've never seen before? Or are we trying to say something? Because then the choices need to defer toward that, as opposed to just, what would be fun? What would people like? Right. And any of those can be valid goals. But you, especially in collaboration, I think you need to agree on what success is. And I think different projects have different ones. In the macro sense, my success, I've come to define it as I can keep paying the bills and providing for my kids, and I enjoy what I'm working on. So like, whether it's I'm really enjoying the people, it's a fun challenge, or like, this is exactly the right fit for me. I just feel like Scrooge McDuck doing backstroke in the money bin. You know what I mean? Like, right. Whatever it is, but it's the two-handed thing of I'm steady providing and I'm not miserable. I'm not working with people who drive me crazy. I'm not working on projects I'm not the right fit for. I'm not banging my head against the wall. And defining as that has let me say no to things, and it's made me happier, and it's made me have more time for my family. So that's good.
Yeah. And like, to piggyback off of two things that you had said earlier about like, you can't control how something is going to be received. Mm-hmm. And did I say the thing that I thoughtfully wanted to say? Like, was I able to take my idea that I had in the beginning and craft it in a way that when I look at it on the page, when all is said and done, and can I look at that and say like, yeah, whether or not this is received is beyond my control and it's outside of my power. But for myself, and in our case as a team, like, can we look at this thing and say like, yeah, this is what we wanted to say, and for to just make it about this project, like we did. Like I'm very proud of like how we shaped the 4 books. I think it sticks the landing. I think we say things. I think we're entertaining. I think it's funny. I think it's dark. And it's all the stuff that when we set out to write this book, I wanted us to say. And so however it's received is beyond our control. But the final product that I've seen is the book that I hoped we would make and have made.
Cool. All right. So I'm going to do this. Actually, no, before I get to the last thing, where can people find you online? That's usually the best thing to, and where can they find the book?
You very deliberately can't find Jim online. He has taken himself off of the internet.
For him.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's better for his mental health.
Yes.
And I envy him. We do have a website, futureskeletons.com, which is, you could send us messages there. There's links to a web store if you want signed things directly from us, that Meeseeks story, or our old end times, different stuff like that. You can check that out through futureskeletons.com in the store. I am on Twitter at James Asmus, all run together, ASMUS. And I'm on Instagram much less often, but let's bump those numbers up because that's a little paltry. I got kind of late in the game on that one. But and to that end, I also don't just have at James Asmus, it's at James_Asmus. But also the book comes out August 3rd, Dark Horse Comics. When you're hearing this, I think our final order is Monday, July 11th, which will have passed. But hey, still call your shop and tell them you want one, because they might still be able to order one of the extra copies that gets printed and is at the warehouse, but at least they'll try to make sure they have one for you. And or you could buy it digitally, but I love supporting the local comic shop, right?
Yeah. All right.
Oh, and then actually, if you go to Future Skeletons, you can find if you go under the subheading for Survival Street, you could find the 12-page Survival Street issue 0 standalone story. It's not going to be in issue 1, 2, 3, or 4. It's its own thing. So you can go read that right now. It doesn't have all the character stuff that we get into in the longer issues, but you'll get a sense of the mayhem and the humor of the book, and certainly have some fun with that for free.
Well, there you go. So the final thing is, we started this a little while ago on the podcast. We usually would end with a recommendation, whatever, something you were watching or read lately that, maybe other people aren't checking out. Or if you didn't have a recommendation, what did you learn on the podcast this week? And Jim, I think you should go first.
I'll make a recommendation. As someone who feels like totally inundated with the sheer amount of streaming services that are out there, this is like one more that I swore to God I wouldn't get. But the comedian Vanessa Bayer, who
I worked with her in Chicago for several years.
Oh my God. What a delightful, hilarious comedian she is. Has a show called I Love That For You. And it's so good. It's so tight. Molly Shannon, it's a wonderful, I'm literally one episode in, but it is just so good that I've broken my I will not get Showtime rule. And also just maybe little known fact, she plays a character who idolizes Molly Shannon, who was like a host of a QVC type show and ends up, 20 years after the fact, becoming a host on a QVC type show. I actually did host on QVC after college.
What? How do I not know this?
Yeah. And I wish, Emily and I, my wife and I were talking about this the other night, I wish I had video evidence. I do not, but maybe that's why it speaks to me. But it's it is, I highly recommend it. She is hilarious. And again, a very three-dimensional comedian, someone who knows how to be funny, but also very truthful and honest and just smart. And I love shows like that.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So I can't believe I didn't know that about you.
Yeah.
See, we keep the relationship fresh. There's all these surprises 10 years into it. Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Jim texted me that thing the other day about comics having plot at the expense of character very often. And I've been thinking about it constantly since then, because I really think the 20-page limit of comics and the expectation to have resolve last issue's twist, set up a twist for this issue, have a big fight scene. I know how those pages just burn away from you. And then you're well, I've got one page to do character stuff in the end. It has really made me so much more mindful of that in my own, in my separate writing. And I was reading some stuff in the interim, and man, oh man, I was so aware. I was bouncing back and forth between two books, and it was an object lesson in one book that was prioritizing character and one book that was not. Mm-hmm. And I had investment and momentum in the book that was all about character, and boy, did I not in the one that was plot. And I was started my eyes are glazing over all the dialogue bubbles and stuff like that. So that's that. You mentioned it here again, and it's only drilling it further into my brain. So I'll highlight that.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's good. I always, you get so comfortable in writing with some things you think you're doing well that you kind of take your eyes off some of the controls, and those start to atrophy a little until you're like, oh God, there's no oxygen in here. A recommendation I will make is for a book coming out from Image that I had previously backed the Kickstarter for by Erica Schultz called Deadliest Bouquet. And it's sort of like a sisters crime comic, girls who were trained by their Nazi hunting mother, and they get together to solve their mom's murder. Mm-hmm. And it's a really just rad, cool crime book. And she was kind enough to name a character who gets murdered in it, James Asmus, and talk constant trash about him. Because I had mentioned one day on Twitter that the thing I miss from my acting days, I always wanted to die in a horror movie, and I never got the chance. I was like, so if someone would kill me in a comic, I would stop fixating over the fact that I probably won't ever do this bucket list thing. Also, if you're listening and you're making an independent horror movie and you want to fly me out and kill me, that would be great too. I have a theater degree. I promise I'll be okay. But anyway, so the book is great. It's really rad. It's super fun. It's coming out through Image now I think this month. And it's a great miniseries. And you can see me get brutally murdered. So there you go. If you didn't like me today, buy that, watch me get killed. If you did like me today, get Survival Street. If you're on the fence, get both.
There's a running thing on the show. JD is an author, and he has killed John in his last 4 books. There's been a character named John O'Grady that has been, because he writes a lot of horror stories, that has been killed in like his last 4 books. Yeah. So I will recommend that you go to superheroespeak.com, where you can find the podcast every week. Links to all our social media at the top of the page, comic book reviews by our good friend D Square, and so much more. I also am truly going to recommend check out Survival Street. I will definitely be doing that. Sounds like a wonderful idea, and it fits right in my sensibilities. So I will definitely be checking out. I recommend you do the same. And finally, I recommend that you go see Thor: Love and Thunder, because we will be reviewing that on the podcast next week.
Nice.
So until then, first I will say thank you, Jim and James, for being on this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as always, thanks for listening. And don't let you keep caught in the door. Have a good week.